Welcome to the Deer Hunter Podcast, a platform created to entertain, educate, and evolve the modern-day deer hunter. So we're good. We're recording. We'll say first, thanks a lot for having us over, inviting us into your home to do this. This is a
It's my pleasure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We may have gotten here a little bit faster, but we did slow down a couple times looking at deer out in a lot of green bean fields around here. A lot of deer out strolling around this morning.
That's understandable. It's getting to be that time of year.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
There might be a few guys that'll listen to this that might possibly not know who you are, but most of the deer hunting podcast community bounces around quite a bit, so most people will be familiar with who you are. We are in the home of John Eberhart to record what's going to be a podcast that I've been looking forward to doing for a long time. We've read some of your stuff. I've been following you since Michigan Woods and Water. You did a lot of writing for them throughout the years, right?
Yeah, I think they've published over 100 articles, usually 5 or 6 a year.
Yeah, and that's where I first discovered you. And then years ago when I started listening to deer hunting podcasts, Mark Kenyon was one of the first guys I heard you on the Wired to Hunt, and a lot of the stuff that you talked about just really translated to me. I think you being a Michigan guy, me being a Michigan guy, your style was so much different than anything that I had really heard before, and to hear you explain it in detail, a lot of stuff just clicked for me. I started doing some stuff differently and instantly saw results. It was pretty amazing at how quickly my sightings of mature deer went up, and since then I knew that you were a guy that when I started this, you were going to be one of the first guys that I wanted to have on the show, because the proof is in the pudding. You definitely have a system, and you definitely do a lot of work, put a lot of work in, and your results are, you can tell me. I know you've said, I think, what do you have?
I'll give you a little bio, but first I'm going to touch on what you said. Most hunters watch TV and they watch hunting videos, and they kind of replicate what they see on TV and videos. And those guys are hunting in managed areas where there's lots of mature bucks. There's antler and age criteria, so they get to be 3 or 4.5 years old before anybody ever even shoots at them. So those bucks pass by hunters while they're growing to maturity, and there's no negative consequences. So there's lots of mature bucks in the area, and they're extremely simple to kill. And then people from Michigan, PA, New York, West Virginia, states like that where there's lots and lots of hunting pressure. We got 320,000 bow hunters, 700,000 gun hunters. You just can't use those same practices and be as successful. So that's kind of what I've done over my years, is I've learned how to hunt in heavily pressured areas, because I exclusively hunt on public land and knock on doors for free permission. Never hunted over bait, never paid a dime to hunt any place in my life. So you have to learn how to hunt different. You have to learn how to hunt different than the other hunters, or you're going to have similar success as those guys.
Right.
And to give you a brief bio, I'm 66 years old. I've been bow hunting 53 seasons. I've got 30 bucks in the Michigan record book from 19 different properties, 10 different counties. And I've taken 57 mature bucks in Michigan that were 2.5 years old or older, but only 30 of them made the book. And I've hunted out of state 21 times, and I've taken 19 Pope and Young bucks on those 21 trips, week-long trips. And again, those are all public land and free permission properties.
Just real quick, touch on what the book is and what the criteria for anybody that doesn't know exactly what you're talking. Pope and Young, right?
Pope and Young's 125 inch net
125 inch.
for a typical 150 inch net for a non-typical.
And so you're talking typically that's going to be a 3.5-year-old deer or older, right? To get a antler size like that would be uncommon for a 2.5-year-old.
Out west, it's possible. You know, you get out to Iowa, Kansas, Southern Illinois, Southern Ohio, Indiana. They do have 2.5-year-old bucks that hit 125 knot. Michigan, no, that just doesn't happen. You know, pressured states, they don't. We have sandy soil, so they don't have the antler growth that they have in some of those Midwestern states where they got rich soil, high crop yields per acre.
Right.
You know, I kind of simulate antler growth to crop yield per acre. You go out to Kansas, Southern Illinois, Iowa, you know, their crop yield on corn is probably half again to 2/3 more than our crop yield per acre.
Yeah.
And I kind of equate that. Antler growth is almost the same
It's
thing.
an interesting way to look at it. I never thought about it like that.
It's minerals in the soil, and it's the same minerals that, you know, spur antler growth, that spur crop growth.
And the resource to food to grow.
Yeah.
I mean, genetically, right? I mean, they're just genetically a little bit of a different.
They're bigger deer. It's a different species, subspecies. There's 17 different subspecies of deer.
Yeah.
But anyway, on my 21 out-of-state trips, it's been either last year was the first year I hunted in Ohio, and I hunted there 2 days after their gun season ended, and I killed a 140-incher. But Ohio, Missouri, I hunted once. Iowa, Kansas, and Illinois on public land. And so on 21 trips, I've taken 19 Pope and Young bucks, and that was off 13 properties in 5 different states.
That's pretty good odds.
Yeah, I like it.
It's about what, 96%, 90?
It's in the 90s, yeah.
Yeah, that's impressive.
And it's, you know what, and it's not just me. I have a good friend that lives in Beaverton, which is like 20 minutes from here, and I'm in central Michigan. His name's Ed Simpson, and he owns 40 acres. He's hunted that 40 acres for over 45 years. And the biggest buck he's ever taken off, it's 110 inches. And he's killed over 70 bucks off that 40 acres. He has made 14 out-of-state trips to either Illinois or Iowa. And again, same as me. He always went by himself, and he's hunting free permission properties. And on those 14 trips, he's taken 12 bucks from 117 inches to 168 inches.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that he became a better hunter once he crossed their southern state line and went to Illinois and Iowa. It's just that much easier to kill mature bucks out there because there's a lot more of them. The rut's more competitive, and they just don't have PhDs at avoiding hunters like they do in pressured states.
Right.
It's just totally different.
This fall will be the first year that I ever venture. I'm going down into Ohio, southeast Ohio, to give hunting some public land down there a try. And I just started reading Precision Bow Hunting, your year-round approach to it. And that's helped a lot, just even your approach to scouting and everything. Because you go down there and you actually see, like, you know, the rub lines and whatnot. Like, the sign is everywhere. Where, like, up in Michigan, you can wander around all day, and if you see one rub on a little 2-inch sapling, you're like, oh, I found something, you know? But down there, yeah, there's rub lines on trees that are 6 inches in diameter, and they're, you know, 3 feet off the ground, just tore right up. So
well, mature bucks, you know, that have had one breeding season behind them, they signpost more. You know, they rub more, they make more scrapes, so it's a lot more prevalent in states where there's a lot more mature bucks. Now, are you going to Wayne National, one of the Wayne National public lands?
Nope. It's by Coshocton, I believe.
Coshocton?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it a lot of timber? Because typically public land's all timber.
Yep, it is. It's heavy timber. I've never actually. I went up to northern Ohio and scouted a little bit, is where I was finding all the rub lines. The area where I'm going to hunt down there, 2 of my friends went down, and they scouted the beginning of March. Yep. And they found some beds and whatnot and various other rubs, and we marked it all on GPS, and then we shared the information from the 2 areas. So we kind of we're going to southeast Ohio. If it's crowded, we're going to go to the area in north Ohio that I scouted. So
now, was northern Ohio less timber?
Yes. Yeah, it's way more.
Anytime you go on a short-term hunt, you should always look for the most minimal amount of timber, especially if, you know, because if you got minimal timber, you're going to be in an ag area typically where there's going to be agriculture.
Yep.
And anytime you got corn or, you know, I go out to Kansas, they got milo because it's too arid for corn out in western Kansas. And I always look for places where once the crops are down, only 5 to 10% of the total area has any security cover. You know, it's typically out there, it's draws. But when you go to a place on a short-term hunt and you're hunting big timber, it's hard to find destination locations.
Right.
You know, basically on a short-term hunt, you're just hoping something transitions by you. Because in big timber, deer tend to just wander. So when you go to a place with less timber and then the crops are down, so if you go in November when the crops are down, the deer are a lot more confined. So, you know, they're more condensed. And when you get out west and they have these draws that just meander through the countryside because they're old floodplain draws, you know, the deer are confined to those draws. That's what they transition through. There's scrapes and rubs all over in those places. So all you do is find the narrowest pinch point in a draw, set up something, and I mean, 150 inches, my criteria on a 1 week hunt. So that's one mistake a lot of people make is when they're going out of state travel hunting. They everybody tends to think big bucks, big timber, you know, and that's not the case on a short-term hunt. You want the most confined traffic you can get on, and you know, you just pick out your pinch points and stuff through the transition cover.
Yeah, that would help a lot. We just got to talk the other guys into that now.
So what you want to do when you're going out there, when you're in big timber and there is no ag, what you want to do is look for the best preferred food sources. You know, and it may be, you know, a briar patch with the nice young green leaves, or some, you know, a patch of white oaks, or you know, a locust tree that's dropping those big long beans or something like that, or a lost apple tree back in the woods. That's about as good as it gets.
Yeah. Cool. Well, that's definitely something we'll keep in mind. I know.
Yeah.
It's going to be a whole different ball game for us, you know. There's 3 of us total going, and we went and put the money into buying the lone wolf stands so we can be more mobile while we're down there. And I was going to actually ask you if we're going to use trail cameras. We each have a couple trail cameras that we were going to set up in various spots, because we laid out probably about 10 different stand locations. Obviously, we can't hunt all of them at one time. So we were going to put the trail cameras at the stand locations we weren't going to be at, and then hunt. And then the next day or whatever, go out, grab those trail cameras, see if there's any pictures on there, and move our sets accordingly to the activity we're seeing. If that was a good idea, or if we're just kind of should just stay out of there.
Depends on how much pressure that particular area is getting. If it's getting a lot of pressure, and you're putting out trail cameras that you have to go physically check, I view that as a negative. But if it's just in a transition pass-through area, it's not going to be so bad, as opposed to at a destination spot where you're leaving scent at an apple tree or a white oak tree. You know, deer are going to be a little more apprehensive about coming in there during daylight hours. Now, when I go to camp, I hardly ever use motion cameras in Michigan. Maybe I think I have twice in all my years. But when I go out west to Kansas, or when I went to Iowa, or when I went to Ohio last year, I exclusively hunted motion cameras, because the deer are just not that smart. You can check them every day. I can drive the guy I go to Kansas with, he has a 4-wheel drive. I use a minivan. So we drive right to the cameras and check them, and it doesn't affect deer movements whatsoever, because the rut's so competitive and there's so many mature bucks in the area. So, and there's no hunting pressure. So using cameras totally depend on the amount of hunting pressure the area is getting and how smart the deer are at avoiding hunters. Because if you're leaving any semblance of human odor, and then you're altering doe activity, all buck activity revolves around doe activity. So if you alter doe activity, you're basically altering your buck activity as well. What time of year are you going?
It'll be the end of October.
Okay. Like Halloween on?
Yeah, it's like the weekend before Halloween. So it's a little earlier than we'd like to go, but like we said, everybody's got young kids. The one guy just had a baby last week, so we'll see if he even makes it there still at this point. But and then the whole tradition of hunting the rut in northern Michigan. So
you don't want to miss that.
I don't want to miss it. You know, I know my odds of shooting a nicer deer are better in Ohio, but some things I just can't let go of. You know.
I understand that, because I never leave Michigan until gun season. I don't gun hunt, so when I go out of state, it's after the 15th of November, because I love the challenge hunting in Michigan. There's nothing like it. You know, back in the day when I'd kill a 110 incher, I was more proud of that than any 160 incher I ever shot in Iowa or Kansas.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
Much more difficult to kill.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot. We've been talking a lot about antlers and antler size on the podcast lately, and antler point restrictions, and all the talk around what we can do here in the state to have bigger deer. And I think personally, yeah, there's just a lot to gain by enjoying the pursuit, and rising to the challenge. And yeah, it's all relative. You could go out west and make it easier. But like I feel like if you continue to do that, real quickly, it would lose its nostalgia. Whereas here, if it's every couple of years that I'm able to get a 125-inch deer or bigger, boy, it just means so much more when you do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm not a big APR advocate either. I was raised down, in the suburbs of Detroit. I was from Northville, so I used to work at a bunch of little crap factories, and when they'd have a big buck contest, most of the guys that worked there, they only got to hunt 1 week. They'd come up north and they'd hunt, and a 6-point, might win the gun pool.
Right.
And they were excited about that. They're not fortunate like I am, where I see deer around me all the time. And, there's so many guys that live up north or deer hunt a lot, and they don't realize how fortunate they are to have the time to do that. And they want to force they want APRs, so they want to enforce everybody else to be mandatorily, be holding to APR restrictions.
Right.
When in reality, most of these guys don't like federal restrictions coming down on you, or state restrictions, EPA restrictions that stifle business. Most people don't like restrictions on them, yet they have no problem forcing their restrictions on all the other hunters in the state. I have a major issue with that. That's hypocrisy 101 in my opinion.
We kind of feel the same way about it, and I thought it was interesting when you and I had talked, and you had told me that you weren't a big fan of APRs, because I think people would look from an outside perspective, and you being a guy who's kind of made it your mission to pursue mature deer, I think people would think, oh, John Eberhart, he'd be a guy for sure that would be on APRs, because there'd be more mature bucks and would make it what he does a little bit easier, right? But it takes away from the whole
challenge part. Yeah, it would definitely make it easier. And to me, I grew up through a process. When I first started bow hunting, I was shooting button bucks, fawns, does, whatever I could get a shot at. And and then into the 70s, I started targeting year-and-a-half-old bucks and mature does, and then I went to 2.5.
Just real quick, take us back to that. So how old were you, and what year was it when you started really getting into deer hunting?
1964, and I was 13.
Okay. And it was just on your own, or
totally
it was a family?
I walked by this archery shop in Ypsilanti. You guys probably know where Ypsi is, down by Ann Arbor.
Sure do.
And the owner of the shop was in there shooting, and he was shooting the old PA round. And obviously this is all recurves. Compounds weren't out then. And a PA round is a 3-inch bullseye at 20 yards. And I walked in there, and he was the only one in the building. And he was just draining that 3-inch bullseye. And with a recurve at 20 yards, to hit a 3-inch bullseye all the time is pretty damn good.
Yeah, it is.
And it just amazed me. And I always thought about deer, because kids in high school, they had uncles that took them hunting. I didn't have any hunters in my family, so I never got to do that. But I just was always entranced by whitetails for some odd reason. So I asked the guy, I said, do you deer hunt? And he said, yeah. I said, man, you must kill a lot of deer. He said, I've shot, and back then there wasn't a lot of deer in southern Michigan. There was no deer hardly at all in Ohio and Iowa and Kansas, in the southern states. But anyway, he said, yeah, I deer hunt. I said, man, you must kill a lot of deer. He said, son, I've shot at 6 bucks with my bow, and they were all closer than that target, and I've yet to hit the first one. I was just like, my mouth fell, and I'm like, how's that possible? He said, when you put fur on that target, he said, I just lose it. I mean, and he was that honest. I think if there would have been other adults in the building, he might not have said that, but because it was me.
Right.
And then I just went out and got a bow and practiced, and I ended up hunting with this fellow that was kind of a friend of ours, and he was a straggly scraggly old guy named Leroy, and he had his front teeth were all rotted out. But he was my vehicle to get out in the Pinckney Recreation area.
Yeah, because you
and
can't
bow hunt.
obviously even drive yet. You're 13 years old, right?
Yeah, and he actually hit me once. When I did get to be 16 and I got a car, I remember driving out to one of the spots, and it was on public land, and it was a spot that he had showed, had taken me to originally. And I was walking out to my car because I didn't tell him I was going out there. I was out there doing some scouting, and I was prepping a location. And I walked out to my car, and I had a hatchet in my hand. That's what I was using for cutting branches and stuff. And he pulled up behind me in his pickup truck, and he walked up to my car, and I was standing outside the driver's door, and he just kind of reached down and grabbed the hatchet out of my hand and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I was out here prepping a location." He said, "Did you ask me if you could come out here?" And I said, "No." And I was intimidated by this guy. He was a bigger fella. And he punched me. He punched me, and he said, "Don't you ever come out here without talking to me first."
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
And you're on public land?
I'm on public land. But it was a spot that he took me to.
I see.
So it was his area.
So ethics were handled a little differently back then.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and when I shot my first doe, I think I was 14 or something like that. I shot a spike horn the first year, and then I shot a doe the second year. And I was with Leroy when I shot that big doe, and she was a monster. And she ran into the swamp. Well, Leroy had been hunting in the swamp. I was hunting on the outside edge of the swamp underneath a pine tree. And basically, I think when he was getting out of his tree, this was a morning hunt, so it's like 10 o'clock. When he was getting out of his tree and he started coming through the swamp, he spooked a doe out of the swamp. And she came out and she stopped like 15, 20 yards right in front of me. And I'm sitting underneath this pine waiting for him. I've already left my stand. So I took my 62-inch Ben Pearson 40-pound recurve, and because the branches were up above, I turned it almost parallel to the ground, and I pulled it back, and I shot at this doe, and the arrow actually hit one of the pine boughs and glanced down and hit her right through both lungs, right perfectly. I would have shot 6 feet over her back if I not hit that branch. And she ran back into the swamp. Leroy came out, and we followed the blood trail and found it, and he actually propped the doe up against a tree and started target practicing at her. Yeah, he was the school of hard knocks, man. I cried. I actually literally cried. I was crying, and that was just him teaching me a lot. I think he was pissed I shot a deer.
Yeah.
To be perfectly honest with you.
Wow.
In his spot.
So was that your first deer?
That was my second deer.
Your second
First
deer.
one was a spike horn.
Awesome.
Yeah.
How quickly did you start changing the way that your advancement in the strategy and the way that you hunt? Was that something that happened relatively quickly, or was it, 10 years into hunting where you started to kind of figure things out?
I'd say it was in the early 70s is when I started really figuring things out and started keying on bucks, antlered bucks. And then in 72, because I was from downstate, I quit my job, married with 2 kids, quit my job, moved up to northern Michigan because there was a lot more deer up here, and lived on welfare for the first 6 months till I found a first crappy job. And that's when I really started, because there were so many deer up here. It was really pretty easy to go out and target, a year and a half old and occasionally a 2.5-year-old buck. And then I got a job at Jay's and was the archery buyer at the largest sporting goods store in Michigan. And that's when I really got serious. I got my first compound, which made a huge difference.
What was that? Do you remember what it was?
It was an old Bear Polar 2. Yes, had 6 wheels on it. And it was adjustable from 50 to 60 pounds. And then if you took there was 2 wheels that the cables rode on. If you pulled the cables off those 2 wheels, it would go down to 35 pounds. So it was 35, and then you could go 50, 55, or 60.
That's when bears were being manufactured in Grayling then, right?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, because Fred Bear had the first opportunity to do the compounds. He was brought the compound bow by Allen, and he turned it down. He didn't want anything to do with them. But then that was in the early 70s, and in the early 70s it was Allen and Jennings. Tom Jennings made made bows,
Gotcha.
compound bows, and then bear almost had to because they were becoming so popular.
Yeah.
So you're working at Jay's, and you're starting to, now you're living in northern Michigan, and you're starting to hunt a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And you've developed now, you want to walk us through basically how your system is right now, kind of how you got to that point, what you started discovering and figuring out, how you've changed that over time, and how you implement that now.
Yeah. Well, I started figuring out that all the bucks I'm killing are during the rut phases. All the decent bucks I'm killing and seeing are during the rut phases. So I started postseason scouting in the late 70s, and that's pretty much all I do now. All my scouting and location preparation is done during postseason, so it's January through April, as long as there's no snow on the ground. If there's snow on the ground, I don't scout, because snow alters deer traffic. Typically if there's deep snow, they'll move into a bedding to feeding, and they bed in a different area. So, and also the scrapes are covered up. A lot of the sign I want to see on the ground is covered up, so I wait until the snow melts, and then the ground looks exactly like it did before the snow fell. So I prep everything during postseason. That way I'm looking at old primary scrape areas from the previous season. I can identify rubs from last year. Licking branches are still obvious. All the runways under the snow from last fall, rut phase stuff is still very obvious. If you go out in preseason scout, scrape areas are typically grown over with grasses and stuff, and you can't see it. And also, postseason, you're looking at an area exactly the way it's going to look like during the rut phases.
Right.
When I look at a tree, I find a destination spot. Let's say it's at a white oak or a scrape area, or an apple tree back in some security cover, or a transition route, and it's something that I think I'm going to be hunting during the rut phases. I'm looking at the tree exactly what it's going to look like during the rut phases, because all the foliage is down. So now I know, okay, I know exactly where I need to be in the tree to have some sort of concealment, background cover, or a lot of wood around me, or, I have to get up higher to be out of their peripheral vision. And also the ground cover is the same way. When you postseason scout, the area looks like it's going to look like during the fall. So, you go preseason, everything looks dense. Looks like there's security cover everywhere.
Right.
You prep something preseason, then you go back, in November, and all the foliage is down, and you're like, wow, this doesn't look anything like it did then. There's really not enough security cover here to warrant a mature buck moving through here during daylight hours. You can have all the sign in the world, but if there's a mature buck visiting that sign, if it's not done during daylight hours, it's relatively meaningless. So everything I do is based on security cover in Michigan. Out of state, it doesn't matter. I'll hunt Kansas, Iowa, I'll hunt field edges. If it's 2 inches of grass, it doesn't make any difference, because there's a lot of deer and they're not that smart.
Right.
But in Michigan, everything for mature bucks revolves around security cover.
Well, and is it safe to say too, this time of year, right now, there's a lot of guys that are doing scouting, hanging tree stands, and then, it never fails, a week before season or opening day, a lot of guys are crawling around through the woods and looking for tracks and signs. That movement from this time of year right now, when people typically aren't in the woods and all the ag is up, is almost 100% different come the end of November or the middle of November, right? I mean, most of the ag crops are gone, the foliage is gone, and what you're seeing now does not replicate what November will, but after the season, it's
everything now is a feeding to bedding.
right.
Deer are totally in the feeding mode. During the rut phases, obviously the mature bucks that I want to kill, or you guys want to kill, they're in a breeding mode.
Right.
So, summer traffic, you go out and, scout summer traffic now, well, that's going to totally change once the crops are cut.
Right.
And also, typically by November, if you're in an area with just a few acorns or apple trees, oaks or apple trees, all that stuff's going to be consumed for the most part. So, yeah, November is totally, rut phase hunting is totally different type of sign, totally different types of location. A lot of guys will go out and they'll set up a location preseason in a bedding to feeding transition route. I rarely ever do that. I want to be at the destination spot. I set up at a white oak tree or at an apple tree or at a primary scrape area. I hunt destination spots and let them work on their own merits. That's why I chose them. So I got a little off track there.
No,
where
no,
I was
no.
at,
You're hitting it right on. And
well, wait a minute. I think I just got it back. So a lot of guys will set up on a transition route from bedding to feeding. If I'm looking at transition routes, I'm primarily looking at transition routes between bedding and bedding areas within a big buck's core area. Because during the rut phases, that's what they do. They'll typically get in and bed down before daylight, half hour to an hour before daylight. And then they'll get up midday, usually 11 to 3 o'clock, and they'll move from one bedding area to another bedding area within their core area. And they'll always take the best transition cover when doing that. So, I'm looking at transition routes between bedding areas for the rut phase hunting as opposed to between a bedding and a feeding area for early season hunting. Because typically where I'm hunting, most of the preseason scouting by all the other hunters in the area that are still within the buck I'm after's core zone, he doesn't just hang out on this 40 acres. He goes all over the place. They're turning him nocturnal before season even opens. So in Michigan, killing a mature 3.5-year-old or older buck early season is very difficult because most of them are totally nocturnal before season opens.
Well, we've noticed, even like you said, we have some property up in northern Michigan that there's other landowners that own as well, and the first 1 or 2 times a pickup truck comes in and out of there, the deer just instantly change. They figure it out so quickly what's happening and change their patterns just dramatically.
Well, they've been totally left alone since turkey season.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of turkey hunting, April, maybe into May, and typically there's not that much turkey hunting. So you got January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, and nobody's messing with the deer woods or anything like that. All of a sudden there's this influx of human activity in the form of preseason scouting and mature bucks that have lived through a couple of breeding seasons. They've been shot at. Most of them have been wounded, carry-old wounds. They know what that means, and they react accordingly. That's just like wouldn't bother you to walk through downtown Wademan at 3 a.m., but you sure as heck wouldn't walk through inner city Chicago in a crime-laden area at 3 a.m. in the morning because you could get killed. And deer are the same way. We're not the only ones that like to survive.
Right.
They have learned to react to human pressure, human interactions during season.
Yeah, it's one thing that I started to discover is how quickly deer learn. I mean, you think about a 1-year-old baby, and they can keep themselves alive for hardly 2 hours. But a 1-year-old deer, boy, they're so intelligent, and it seems like a buck, especially from what I've seen in Michigan. You give them 1 or 2 years, and boy, they figure out real quickly how to stay away from people. And see a lot of deer. We've had used cameras for years. We'll put these cameras out, and it never fails. Midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, you're getting these pictures of these giant, they look like 6-7-year-old 170-inch deer, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, it's going to be so amazing this hunting season. And hunting season comes, and you're like, where could they possibly be? Like, they're alive, but boy, trying to find them. And
you're getting 160, 70 inches up north?
No, we hunt southern Michigan too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we hunt a lot of around a lot of ag down in southeast Michigan.
Well, one thing you mentioned that was kind of interesting. You said, they get smart. They either get smart or they get killed.
Right.
I mean, if they don't get smart, they die. They get shot. The stupid ones get killed.
Right.
So, typically a 2.5-year-old buck in Michigan, a 95-inch, 14-inch 8-point, something like that. He is definitely in a pressured area, like on public land or, a section where there's 20 houses and, 20 bow hunters and trees opening day of bow season. A 2.5-year-old's much, much more difficult to kill than a 150-incher out west.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not even comparable.
Yeah. So I kind of want to walk through like your itinerary of the year of how you're approaching the season. So as soon as the deer hunting season ends, you're doing a big bulk of your work for the preparation for the next season.
Yeah,
right?
Typically there's snow on the ground, so I typically start doing that March, but I'm done by the end of April. And you got to keep in mind, because I'm hunting public land and free knock on doors for permission, I gain and lose properties all the time.
Okay.
So I obviously, on the properties that I retain, I still have my locations. So I'll go into those locations and clean them up. You know, I'll clear out the runways. You know, if they're in a swamp or they're in an area where there's a lot of dense cover, I'll clean up the runways, you know, take all the dead debris that fell out during the winter or overgrowth and trim that. So I'll kind of clean up my old locations, but I will also look for new locations based on maybe what I saw on that property last fall, or I pick up a new piece of property.
Gotcha.
So on a typical year, postseason, I will probably prep 5 to 10 new locations per postseason, and I typically go into season with a minimum of 40 trees prepped and ready to hunt at any one time, you know, on 3 or 4 different pieces of property. And then I hunt them according to the sign. Like if I'm scouting and I see an apple tree or a white oak or a primary scrape area, especially the food part, the oaks or the apple trees, you know, I'll prep something there. But I have no clue when I'm prepping it in the spring if it's going to have master fruit.
Right.
So I have to do a speed tour, but that's going to be an early season location if they are producing. So I'll do a speed tour just prior to bow season with total scent lock. And basically what I'll be looking for is I'm not prepping anything. I'm just walking through what I perceive to be my early season locations to see if they're actually dropping food and if there's any buck sign. And the reason I do it just before bow season, the speed tour, and as scent free as possible, is because mature bucks were rubbed out usually by the 5th of September. So, you know, if they are feeding at one of these destination feeding locations, there's going to be buck sign there in some form. Right. And typically, if there's apples on the ground by late September, there's only 1 or 2 trees there, there's going to be scrapes there as well because there's doe activity there.
So you said you have 40 to 50 trees prepped and ready to go. So I know your system a little bit just in listening to you, but explain to you hunt out of, you're fully mobile. You're as lightweight and as mobile as possible. You utilize an old harness and saddle system, which guys could similarly replicate your style by using some of the newer lightweight tree stands and still have a lot of...
No, they can't.
But, well, what I'm saying is not nearly as efficiently, but they could be going into the season having all these multiple locations. But you feel the way that you using the saddle is much more beneficial.
Yeah, because if you were to buy tree stands, you'd have 40 or 50 tree stands. And if you're hunting public land, they're going to get stolen. That's just a matter of fact.
Right.
So I'm hunting out of a hybrid sling, which I made myself, and it rolls up the size of a softball. I'll show it to you later. It's in my vehicle.
Yeah, I would like to see it.
And it weighs about 1.5 pounds, so it easily fits in my backpack. And I can walk to any of those trees, and it's always in my backpack, so I can walk to any of those trees and hunt any of them at any point in time because they're all prepped. They're all prepped and ready.
It's amazing, you know, I've been hunting for 20 years. I've never seen anyone hunt out of a saddle until you mentioned it, and then a cousin of ours picked one up to check it out, and I've looked at his a little bit, but amazingly unpopular. Is that something that is still available to purchase?
It's going to get a lot more popular real soon. I don't want to bring up I hate bringing up.
No, I'm not against that whatsoever.
I did a podcast for Big Buck Registry.
Yeah, listen to it.
And it was about the saddle because they were getting a lot of inquiries into some sort of harness hunting. And the saddle is actually, they went out of business due to reasons other than the saddle itself. But there's a company called New Tribe, and they're coming out with a new type of harness system probably around mid-August. I talked to the owner the other day for about a half an hour. They already have something out there called the Arrow Hunter Evolution, but it's got a lot of buckles and stuff on it. This new one's going to be very streamlined, and it's going to be around $300. And so for $300, you've got one harness that you can hunt out of for the rest of your life.
I'm super interested in it.
And it sounded, the way she described it, it's going to be very streamlined.
Yeah, because you have one thing that you carry with you, and you have the ability to get up in all these trees. You're fully mobile. You can hunt multiple locations, and to what you had explained on that podcast, and I'll tell people, just go right to that and listen to it because it's very in depth on how you approach all that. But my draw to it is the comfort factor.
it's way more comfortable in a tree stand once you learn how to use it.
The only time I've ever been comfortable in a tree stand is when I'm in no situation to ever shoot a deer. I'm like slouched way back in it and with my hands in my pockets, or typically if I'm in a hunt ready situation, I can't stay in that position for very long without getting uncomfortable and have to shift around and move around, which I would love to remedy that.
Yeah, with the saddle, I sleep in it all the time. I'm in my trees 2 hours before daylight, so I typically wrap my arms around the lead strap and lean forward and lay on it and fall asleep for an hour or so.
Yeah, that sounds
It's
great.
not a dead sleep, but the advantages are way more than the mobility. I can shoot 360 degrees around any tree. There are no dead spots. I can use the tree as a blocker. If there's deer coming in, I don't want to shoot it. I get behind the tree and use it as a blocker so my profile's not sticking out. I can hunt a leaning tree up to 15 degrees. I can hunt a flat wall, so tree diameters are not an issue. I can hunt any tree, doesn't matter the diameter. It can be 6 inches through and I can hunt it. So a lot of times when you're hunting out of tree stands, you find a destination location and there's never a suitable tree for what you're hunting. Conventional hunting apparatus is. So a lot of times I've talked to many guys and they have to set up off of the actual destination spot.
Yeah.
So that puts a lot of runways and stuff out of your wheelhouse shooting distance.
Right.
And with the saddle or Sling or this new one from New Tribe, and it's www.newtribe.com is their site. And I'm not promoting it. It's just the only thing out there right now.
I'll put a link right on the show notes so that people can go check them out.
Yeah. With that, you can hunt any tree, 360. I mean, the 360 is a huge advantage.
Oh, in a tree stand, when I typically set up, I usually have about maybe 120 degree
shooting
range, straight out and then over my, my left hand and shoulder. And, in some cases, if it's clear enough behind me, but typically I'm trying to find a backdrop for cover when I'm in a tree stand so that I'm not getting busted. So I usually have something dense and thick to my back anyway, so I can see the advantage of being on the opposite, being able to position the tree.
Yes.
Because you're not sticking out like a sore thumb.
Whenever I'm setting up at an apple or a white oak or a primary scrape area, I'm always set. My body is on the opposite side of the tree from where I'm going to shoot, 180 degrees on the opposite side. So there's always a tree between me and the destination spot.
Yeah.
And all I have to do is lean a little bit to the left and take my shot.
Yeah.
And that's a huge advantage. I never get picked. And with tree stands, I always got picked. And I only hunted out tree stands for maybe 5 years, from 75 to 81. Because I've been hunting out of this harness since 1981 exclusively.
Exact same one.
I would never even consider hunting out of a conventional stand.
Yeah, I got to give it a shot.
Yeah. Oh, and you guys are young and healthy. You would have no problem.
Right.
You just have to learn how to sit in it. A lot of times the instructions these things come with, if you did it the way they show you, it's not very comfortable. They show you hooking up the lead really high, and you really need to bring the lead down to about eye level.
Okay.
So that your upper body is leaning forward. You never want your upper body leaning back, beyond parallel to the tree, because that puts a lot of pressure on your lower back.
Gotcha. So, all right, so you're doing all your scouting before summertime comes. Summertime, if I watch deer hunting TV, they're telling me that's when I need to be out doing all my food plots and getting all my tree stands hung and all that. But John Eberhart's out fishing.
You get that right every day. I'll be fishing today probably. Yeah, food. I'm not a food plot guy. I'm not a bait guy. And it's kind of interesting. I scouted a guy's property down by Hastings a week ago. And he owned 21 acres. And it seems like young people nowadays just think if I don't have a food plot, I'm not deer hunting.
Right.
And he owns 21 acres. It's 100% surrounded by crop fields. So if he spooks a deer, and it's got a lot of bedding in this 21 acres. It's pretty dense. So if he spooks a deer off his 21 acres, the next timber is 3/8 of a mile away. So he's planted 2 food plots on this 21 acres, and he planted them in such a place where his entry routes are going to spook deer, because 21 acres is not that big.
Right.
And he had 2 spots where he had 2 apple trees on his property. And these apple trees were loaded with apples, and they were like 15 yards off the edge of these fields, and yet they were still surrounded by security cover. So I said, let those food plots grow in, plant autumn olive in there, let that get as dense as possible, and all you've got to do is hunt these apple trees. I guarantee if you wait till Halloween, you hunt these apple trees 2 times each, and I don't think it'll take that long. You'll kill the biggest buck on this 21 acres. But I told him, if you keep your food plots and you hunt your food plots, if you do have a decent buck bedding on your property and you bust him out of there, he's going to bed someplace else.
Right.
And the odds of him now, if he's bedding at least 3/8 of a mile away, the odds of him coming across 3/8 of a mile of open crop field to get to your spot during daylight hours is a negative. It's negative. It's below 0. His odds are below 0. That is not going to happen. Now, there's a chance he may come in there after dark and be with a hot doe and be bedded in there the next day with a hot doe.
Right.
But once he's busted that buck out of there, that buck's not going to bed there on his own, during deer season. He's going to be off someplace else.
Right.
It's not like having a piece of property and you're surrounded by other bedding area properties, your neighbors, where you bust a buck off yours and he's going to go on the neighboring property and he's still going to transition through yours eventually. If he's that far away, you just totally screwed yourself. So,
right.
So that's what he's going to do. He's going to set up the apple trees and hunt the apple trees.
Good.
And easy entry and exits without spooking anything.
Yeah. Well, I plant some food plots, and one is we grew up on a farming family, and I kind of just enjoy a little bit of getting out there every, couple times a year and getting the tractor going and doing some of that. But I don't know that any of that work has ever translated into helping me kill a deer.
No. And we have the luxury of, growing up on a family farm. We have all the tractors, implements, and equipment, so it's a relatively low cost for us to do it. You got to buy the seed. And the farm that we grew up in, our great-grandpa actually bought it, and it was a sod farm at one point in time. So that's why we have access to all this stuff. And it's the best soil. There's no reason to even take a soil test. You can grow whatever you want.
Sod farms are always pretty black soil.
It is.
So.
Down where I used to hunt down by Pinckney, there was quite a few sod farms. And when they cut the sod up, I was just shocked at how black the dirt was.
And that's what it looks like, too.
Yeah.
And, we were always led to believe we watched a lot of the deer hunting TV and stuff, and they would endorse food plot companies and stuff. And you, as a young guy, being impressionable, you'd think, well, shit, all I got to do is do what this guy says. I just got to go buy this secret seed and throw it in the dirt, and I'm going to have every deer in the county, and I'm going to get to take my pick.
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
And then you realize over the course of a couple of years, you're like, I haven't seen a single deer in daylight hours on this thing. It doesn't transition well into hunting a pressure
You have
area.
to never forget the guys that are selling these food plots are from low pressured or micromanaged areas where there's lots of mature bucks. They don't have consequences until he reaches age or antler criteria. So anytime something doesn't have any negative consequences while he's growing to maturity, he's going to keep similar daytime movement patterns.
Right.
And he's going to tolerate some semblance of human odor because he's done it in the past without getting shot at. So, there are definitely places for food plots. If you're in a big timber area and you don't have any destination feeding locations on your property, food plot's a great thing to have. But in Michigan, big mature bucks rarely, even in a food plot, if it's in a seriously pressured area, they typically don't show themselves in that open food plot till after dark.
No, they don't.
Yeah, that's just the way Michigan, Michigan, I don't want to say just Michigan because I'm looking at Michigan, PA, places in Wisconsin, New York, West Virginia, all up along the northeast, Delaware, Massachusetts. Those places get beat to death.
Yeah.
That's I hardly ever even hunt the family farm downstate anymore because it was literally, you'd sit out in your tree stand all day, and then it would get to that point where it's too dark to shoot anymore, and all the deer would come running by you. They were just tuned right into it. You could set an alarm to it.
Yeah.
As soon as you could not see your pin in your peep sight anymore, you'd hear the just come right underneath you. It's what is the point of even sitting out here?
Well, you're hunting field edges.
Right.
That's something I never do in Michigan.
Well, that's
unless it's standing corn.
The way the property is, it's about 30 acres of a thin strip of woods, and then the rest of it is all the field. So the only property we have access to is that field edge. You know, you could probably get like 70 yards into the woods is about as deep as you can really get off the field edge. So
is the woods, if there's deer coming out of it, it must be thick enough for deer to bed.
Well, yeah, the people behind us actually have done selective cuts and stuff, so that's all nice. They all bed back there. We're kind of in the staging area going into the field, but it's just they're so nocturnal because we just can't get close enough to the beds in order to.
See, something like that would probably warrant a midday location during the pre-rut. You know, Halloween through November 7th time frame. You know, and 11 to 3 o'clock sit in a good transition cover area where a mature buck could come out of their bedding area and possibly check for any does that may be bedded on yours during the middle of the day.
Yeah, well,
that'd be about it.
It's a pretty open, mature timber.
Oh, okay. No understudy.
Not really. The neighbors, like he said, did some selective cutting, so they have some now, and you know, the deer definitely. I walked it this winter, and the deer are definitely spending their time in there. But, you know, we'll do some food plots on the field edge, and, you know, when it does get dark, they'll move out and they'll eat. But I've found there's literally almost no rhyme or reason in that whole section of mature woods. There's maybe a few spots that I've identified that they'll selectively go to, but those deer will just find a deadfall, and they'll lay up in there. And this is where what I read and listened to by you really implemented and changed how I do things is those deer were always getting in there before I was in there. You know, I would come into these spots to hunt, and even if I planned on sitting all day, those deer would already be in that block of woods.
Spooking them with your entry.
Yeah, and they would know right away that I was in there. And you know, as soon as sunup hit, those deer could see, you know, almost that whole square of woods, and they just know if people were in there. So that was one big thing that changed my sightings going way up, was going in there 90 minutes to 2 hours before it gets light and sitting quietly. And what do you know, around, you know, 9 or 10 o'clock, a deer stands up 70 yards from you, and that would have never happened before if I was walking in there at, you know, daybreak.
I get a lot of emails about that because but everybody, and even on TV, everybody's in, you know, they go in a half hour before daylight, and they can get away with it because where they hunt, there's tons of mature bucks, and they move during the mature bucks out there move during the normal time frame of the does and the other deer because there's so little hunting pressure. But, in Michigan, they usually come in a half hour to an hour before daylight and bed down, and then they'll get up during midday and move around or whatever, looking for does in the area and go from this bedding area to that bedding area as long as they've got good security transition cover. And, I usually get to the woods 2 hours before daylight, and I'm in my tree and settled in quiet an hour and a half before daylight.
Yeah.
Every time during the rut phases. Not out west. Out west, I don't do that, but in Michigan.
So walk me through once season approaches. So you've done your scouting early in the spring. You're doing other things in the summertime. You're going to do your speed tour, typically you said right before season opens?
Between the 20th of September and season.
And you're picking any particular day to do that?
If I have my option, I would do it during inclement weather, real windy or rainy days to keep my noise down as minimal as possible. Because a lot of times, you know, when you have stuff prepped in the spring and then you go back in late September, there may be some minor amount of growth you have to trim out of a shooting lane or something like that. Or if you're in a white oak, a lot of time you get a lot of these little oak shoots that grow off the branches and stuff that you have to climb up there and trim that stuff out.
Right.
Because it kind of impedes your shooting lanes. So there is some minor trimming. So I try to do that on inclement weather if possible, but because I've only got a 10-day window to get that stuff done on 3 or 4 properties.
Right.
It's not mandatory because I do go in with an extreme scent control regimen.
Right. So walk me through once season opens, October 1st here in the state of Michigan. You're getting up early.
I'm getting up. It depends on where I'm going to hunt. I mean, if I'm hunting downstate, which I have for the last couple of years, I'm getting up at 1:30 in the morning because it's a 2 hour and 20-minute drive. So that's getting me down there in plenty of time to be in my tree an hour and a half before daylight and settled in.
And then you're taking a little nap.
Yeah, and I always fall asleep once I'm up in the tree.
Yeah.
I always lean forward on my lead and take a nap.
Right.
But early season, I'm always almost 90% of the time hunting at an apple tree, at a primary scrape area, or at a white oak. Preferably primary scrape area or an apple tree.
So those primary scrape areas are they get quite a bit of traffic even right October 1st. I know a lot of guys think scrapes don't really mean too much until around Halloween.
No, scrapes are very good to hunt early season if it depends on the preseason scouting in the area. You know, if they turn to bucks nocturnal, yeah, the scrape areas are going to be worthless, but I don't know that until I hunt it.
Right.
So, but yeah, typically that's what I key on is scrape areas and apple trees. Now, apple trees I won't hunt in the morning because I'm spooking deer feeding at them with my entries.
Right.
Same with white oaks. You know, those are strictly evening spots. Scrape areas I will hunt in the morning, or transition areas through a swamp from a bedding to a feeding area. That would be a morning early season spot.
How much of that, like the scrape areas, are you taking into account, like historical data? Like maybe you have got the opportunity to hunt this property a year or two now, and you know historically because of the topography and the location that you don't even really have to go in there. You kind of know from the data that you've taken over the last couple of years that this is going to be here.
Very good point. This property where I'm doing my workshops, the infield day, it's a 170-acre parcel, but only 37 of it's huntable. The rest of it's all tilled up into crops. And there's very fortunate to have 3 primary scrape areas on this property.
Okay.
And they are there every year. They're annual. Now, this year there's a lot of apples, so I've got 2 or 3 spots there at apple trees. And there is no question whatsoever they will have scrapes at them when I go in September on my speed tour. And then when we walked through last Saturday on our infield day, at one of them's a red oak on the edge of on the edge of a kind of a cattail marsh area next to a river. And then there's about a 20-yard tall weed buffer, and then there's a standing corn. There's always scrapes under that tree, and one of them had already been worked, and that's mid-July.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, since you brought it up, why don't you explain what your infield day is, and is it a seminar that you're giving?
Nope. The infield day is on this 37 acres. There's 2 other guys that hunt this 37 acres. I've taken 5 book bucks off it. They've hunted it for over 20 years. They haven't taken any off it. But I've got 14 locations prepped on this 37 acres, so it's a full day of just walking around to each location, pointing out the entry routes, the exit routes to each location, why I'm up in this tree as high as I am, or why is this a morning spot only? Why is this an evening spot only? Why is this spot saved for rut phases only versus an early season location? Why is this a secondary location for viewing only? I'm just walking through every spot and kind of showing people and telling them why I do that, why I have a plan for every location. So that, and it's kind of interesting because you can read something and you kind of get a mental picture, but until you visually see how a location's set up, when I walk through the woods and see a lot of other hunters' locations, it just blows me away. They have inadequate shooting lanes. They're sitting too low. They're on the wrong side of the tree. They picked the wrong tree for the destination spot. Or they set up on 2 runways over here when if you follow those 2 same runways, they intersect with another 3rd or 4th runway 50 yards farther. So why would you not set up where there's more opportunities? You got the same 2 runways feeding this other spot where there's 2 other runways coming into it. Why wouldn't you have set up there as opposed to where you did? I've seen tons of other hunters' locations, and it just always blows me away. To me, how inferior they would be. Most of them I wouldn't even think about hunting because typically they're set up too low. That's the typical issue.
Yeah, that's one thing that Kevin and I have definitely avoided. We're more of a 25 and above foot, that's where we like to be. I don't like, if I'm at like 20 or lower, I just feel completely exposed when I'm sitting up
naked.
There. Yeah.
Well, and it's true. You're getting up out of their peripheral vision. You can get away with some minor movements at crunch time when you need to make draw a bow and make a shot. you just can get away with a lot more stuff at 20,
Yeah.
25 feet.
Yeah, and it's
No doubt
not a
about it.
concern of yours, and that's the next thing I want to get into. But for us, we've found when we hunt higher, our scent will typically carry a further distance out.
Oh, absolutely.
Even if our wind is blowing right in the deer's face where he's standing, our scent stream is carrying over and beyond where that deer is, and had a lot of success with that. But going back to you getting out early in the morning, what's your scent regiment like in the morning when you're getting ready to go out hunting?
I step between my 2 front seats and I slide into the back of my van, and I'm wearing street clothes when I'm driving, obviously. And
so no scent-free shower.
Oh yes, I always do that.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's a given. I mean, that's not a necessity. If I have the opportunity, I do. But if I'm working all day and I want to take off and go hunting in the evening, and I don't have time to take a shower because it's going to make me a half hour later, and I don't want to be a half hour later. My scent control, my scent lock, I'm not concerned about anything underneath it. It's almost like putting a shield around me.
Right.
So I can be stinky, and it's not going to be a factor. But if I can shower and be as scent free as I can before I put that stuff on, I'm going to do that. But anyway, I get in the back and I change my clothes. Typically, if it's cold outside, I'll put my layer garments in my backpack, which is a scent lock backpack, so it's a carbon lined backpack. I'll put my layering garments in there because I always want to. If I'm going to do a long entry walk, I want to be cold as opposed to warm. I do not want to overheat.
Right.
So I'll get to my tree, climb up the tree, let my body cool off if I'm overheated a little bit, and then I'll put on my other layer garments and then put my scent lock jacket back on over top of it.
Okay.
And I always wear a head cover with a drop-down face mask. You got to have that because about 40% of your odor comes out of your head.
Yeah, your mouth, your nose.
Hair. Hair's huge.
I started shaving my head in the fall, so.
There you go. I shave my armpits and my crotch, and I do all that. And it's kind of funny because you watch TV. Even the guys that scent lock sponsors, they wear a logo cap with their hair hanging out and their necks exposed, and they got this cool looking stupid face paint on their face with beards, and that's just totally, any one of those things totally negates your scent lock suit.
Right.
Totally, 100%.
Yeah, scent's a huge thing.
Do you buy into the whole ozonics, the ozone generators at all, or?
I had when the Ozone 6 machines came out. Do you guys remember those? That was the first
well,
ones.
ozonics were the ones that kind of got mainstream and got real popular, and I don't know, that's going back 5-10 years
Probably
now
10
since
years,
they've been out, but there was something prior to that.
Well, it was about 10 years ago. An Ozone 6 machine came out, and basically it was something that came with a little hose, and you took an airtight container of some sort, and you ran the hose into that, and you put whatever you wanted in there to decontaminate or, break down the human odor,
Right.
and you turned it on, and it did that. My first test, obviously, was a stinky old pair of tennis shoes. And it definitely got rid of the odor from the tennis shoes, but it left a very strong some sort of an ozone odor,
Right.
which I would never take into the woods. There's no way. Foreign odors are not good. When you're hunting mature bucks, any odor that's foreign to where they're residing
Right.
is going to change their mindset.
My big problem with the infield generators, which are real common.
Over the head things?
It's a little generator. It's about the size of this little box right here. And they actually mount in the tree, and they emit ozone. And the thought process is that you have that traveling with your whichever way the wind is blowing, and it's going to bond ozone to your scent. And I don't know. My problem with that is the wind is shifting and changing all the time. To me, and I'm not very interested in having a piece of electronic equipment running over my head while I'm sitting out in the woods. But I do utilize ozone a little bit for decontaminating things. We found it to be real beneficial because when we go up to deer camp, 5 guys sleeping in a camper for a week can get relatively
stinky.
Yeah. So we bought a small little ozone generator.
Yeah.
And it's amazing when you turn that thing on within 30 minutes. You walk in there and it's like, oh my God, you can't, it smells fresh and clean.
Yeah.
But I do know what you're saying. It does have a lingerance of, it almost smells like exactly what it smells like after a heavy rainstorm.
Yeah.
To me, a lot of times.
I just know it's a foreign odor. Anything that's foreign, new rubber boots is a foreign odor. I never wear new boots hunting for at least a year or two.
So you're a big advocate of scent lock activated carbon.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
No sprays.
Right.
Total 100% activated carbon.
Yep. And you've been using it for what? When did scent lock come on the scene?
92. I've been using it. For the last 17, I paid zero attention to wind direction whatsoever.
Yeah, how nice is that?
I did a podcast last night, and he said, well, tell me a couple stories about deer coming in from downwind that you shot. And I'm like, because I pay no attention to wind, I don't really recall which direction they were coming from. Because wind direction means I don't pay any attention to wind whatsoever.
It's got to be so refreshing, because we get put in situations a lot of times where it's like, oh, I want to go to this spot because I know it's active right now. There's a lot of deer
because the wind's wrong.
And you can't. And you might even be on a trip for a couple days and you're like, you kidding me? I'm not going to be able to go sit here because the wind's wrong. And to eliminate that, man, does that sound refreshing.
Oh my God, yeah, you get to hunt the sign the way the sign should be hunted.
Right.
I mean, years ago, I hunted the wind for 35 seasons.
Right.
So I'm very familiar with what it's like to have to hunt the wind.
Right.
I did it for years. Probably more years than you guys are old. and so exactly the same. I got to the point where I wouldn't set locations up in saddles. I wouldn't set locations up on sides of ridges. I wouldn't set locations up in corners of fields, because wind thermals and wind swirling would always bust me. And rather than getting busted, it totally made those locations irrelevant. And then there was times where my rut phase locations, just like you were saying, 60+% of all mature bucks are killed during the 3-week period of the rut phases. I don't care what state you're in. So that's when you key all your free time. And so when you have days off work and the wind's not right to those locations, you only have X amount of opportunities, maybe 3 or 4 during that 3-week time frame. And if you can't hunt them, and it's your best spot, I mean, to me, it's like once I got to the point where I didn't have to worry about the wind, it just lifted this thing off everything. Now I set up in saddles. I set up on ridges. I set up in corners of weed fields. Nothing is out of the equation. I don't worry about wind thermals and swirls.
Yeah, I could see it changing everything too. And not only that, even if your wind is blowing properly for the spot that you pick as the destination, there's still deer traveling behind you 100 yards where your wind stream's dropping down. I've been in situations where I was hunting a ridge where I knew that there was a guy hunting a ridge half mile down from me, upwind of me, and I'd watch deer cut out in front of me, and as soon as those deer got to where I knew his wind was coming down, well, I figured that out after I saw 2 or 3 deer coming up over the ridge and lock right up, put their nose up in the air, and boom, turn around and double back. And I'm thinking, that guy has no idea how much he's affecting the woods downwind of him, and the deer are going to remember that.
Yep. And also deer, when, if non-targeted deer come in and they go by you, they're going to be downwind of you at some point. Mm-hmm. That's something I did on that interview the other night. I was like, how can anybody say wind doesn't matter? Because at some point in time, if you're hunting in a bedding area, you're going to have deer downwind of you. I don't care. You're just going to do it because deer tend to wander around in bedding areas, and there's not a lot of rhyme or reason, when they're doing that early in the morning or late evening or midday when a buck's, checking for estrus does.
Right.
And, I hear all these dog stories. I just get the biggest kick out of, well, these dogs, they've done tests where guys are in scent lock and they walk out into the field and a dog finds them in 10 seconds. That is the biggest crock of BS I've ever heard in my life. If I had no human odor on me whatsoever, 0, but I still weighed 160 pounds, if I walked out into a field, I'm disrupting the ground. I'm totally changing the smell on the ground. I'm breaking grasses, I'm breaking weeds, and I'm I'm basically doing ground
Yeah, you're
disruption.
agitating the landscape.
Yeah, and a dog can follow that with no problem whatsoever. That would be like you walking through a dew-covered field, early in the morning, and then turn around and look, and it's very easy for us to visually see where we walk because we disrupted the dew.
Right.
Well, an animal or a deer can easily smell ground disruption. I have does come across my routes quite frequently, and they'll stop and they'll sniff the ground, and they may turn and follow towards my tree for 10 yards and then lose interest and go. I'm not concerned that they smelled my human odor. They're just following this ground disruption, probably out of curiosity, wondering what it was. I mean, it didn't spook them. If there was human odor there, they would have spooked.
Or your scent has been reduced to such a level, too, that they may view that as something that happened days ago, and they're just interested in checking that out. Because when you're hunting a highly concentrated area of humans, there's very few spots where there's not, at some point in time,
some residual human odor.
Say you've stayed out of your hunting property for the last 30 days because you didn't want to infect it, and some kid comes, with his buddy after high school, and they just run through there or push through there with their mountain bikes or decide to there's always human impact, and deer, I think, are always smelling people, but it's at a level in their head where they are deciding if it's a direct impact. Is this human close enough to have a
threat on my life?
So even if they were picking up a small amount of odor, if you're in full scent lock, I would think that they would identify as, okay, I understand that there might be a human half a mile that way.
Yeah.
The reduction is that great.
Yeah. And there's been 3 times I've had coyotes walk down through weeds, walk down my entry route. I mean, and coyotes have really good noses.
Right.
So the only time I would ever pay attention to a test, and I actually talked about this last night on that other podcast, I said, if I were capable of dictating how the test went for a dog test, I would be in a full scent lock suit, totally deabsorbed, face mask, old rubber boots. There's no odor on the boots. And I would want to be dropped from a real high distance so that the chopper blades didn't disrupt the smell of where they were going to put me. I'd want to be dropped from a rope into a field, and then I would just lay there in a fetal position and then have a dog walk downwind of me at 50 yards and see if he could smell where I was. And I would almost guarantee my house he could not.
Yeah. Why do you think more people, does ScentLock have an exclusive patent on that? Why haven't more of the deer hunting companies tried to utilize carbon technology?
Because they can't.
Because ScentLock has the patent on it.
ScentLock has the patent on using activated carbon in hunting garments. Now, there's activated carbon is used in chemical warfare suits in every country in the world. It's used by every hospital in the world for oral ingestion of poisonings to basically absorb the poisonings out of the stomach. Every EMS has activated carbon tablets on their EMS truck. NASA uses activated carbon in their space suits. Every car's got activated carbon in it someplace for filtration. NASA or the United States Department of Energy uses it to store hydrogen gas. I mean, activated carbon's been around for a long, long time. Yeah. And it's not like activated carbon is not the stuff that's out in your fire pit, ash from wood. Activated carbon is like coconut shells or trees, wood, but it's heated at 1450 degrees under pressure. That's how activated carbon's made. Right. And it's extremely porous. If you took one buttercup, a 1 pound buttercup of just one of those little plastic tubs, and you filled it with 1 pound of activated carbon particles. And keep in mind, these particles are smaller than a grain of sand. And if you took all the interior pores of every particle and all the surface area of every particle, and you laid it on a flat surface, it'd cover over 100 acres. That's how porous it is. That's why it's used in so many filtration purposes worldwide.
Right.
The hunting industry doesn't invent anything.
Right.
They don't have scientists and they don't have R&D labs. Any technology that's out there in the hunting marketplace was developed by, worldwide industries or worldwide governmental bodies. Because they don't have the money. Hunting companies, none of them have the money to do stuff like that.
Right. I understand
so they're piggybacking off other technologies.
I've used carbon for a long time, being a plumber for water filtration systems.
Yeah.
So I have a general understanding
Paint respirators. Yeah.
Yep, how it works. And now it's kind of interesting, being a plumber, you know, a lot of medical marijuana places now in Michigan, people are growing pot basically everywhere.
Oh,
And if you walk on the same block as a house that somebody is growing marijuana in their basement, you can smell the stuff.
Right.
It just has an odor.
There's so much THC in marijuana nowadays. Yeah.
You can smell the stuff from a mile away. So what people do is use big charcoal filters.
Right.
And I'm shocked when you go into I'll get a plumbing call and I'll go in there, and you can tell instantly real quick who is, you know, utilizing carbon filters, because it's amazing that scent is just 100% gone.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of why I'm you know, I guess if I didn't have that knowledge and known those couple things, you know, because people go back and forth whether carbon works, right? And I've heard you talk about it, and
Well,
it's
that's
typically
people that they don't study anything. Anybody that questions whether activated carbon works is not very bright.
right, or they have,
Hate to be that blunt, but that's just a fact.
or they've had negative experience because they're not using it correctly, not treating it correctly, right?
Yeah, and that's no fault of their own. You know, when I'm doing seminars, I'll always ask, okay, how many, when I get to the scent control portion, how many of you guys own or have owned and used, you know, activated carbon line suits? And when I say that, I kind of put a big blanket over it, because Scent Blocker used to use activated carbon, and they were paying Scent Lock almost $1 million a year in licensing fees, and that's why they quit using activated carbon and went to Trinity, which is considerably less absorptive capacity. But anyway, you know, so Blocker used to use activated carbon in Scent Lock, and Cabela's does some activated carbon stuff. They pay Scent Lock the licensing fee. So a lot of hands usually go up when I ask that question, and then I ask how many people have gotten winded, and usually probably 2/3 of the hands go up. And then I'm like, okay, how many of you guys use rubber boots? Most of them do, or neoprene boots, muck boots. Okay, how many of you use the drop-down face mask? Not a lot of them do, you know, because none of the TV guys do. And then when I ask them, okay, how many of you guys use a backpack or a fanny pack? All of them use a fanny pack or a backpack. Okay,
Right.
and now how many of you guys wash your fanny pack or backpack in scent-free detergent and keep it in an airtight container?
Right.
Only when, you know, unless you're actually physically using it in the field. None of them. So you get into your backpack or fanny pack every day during season with your bare hands to reload it and reorganize it, and yet you never wash it. So here you go out in the woods, you can have everything else pristine, perfect, even with the drop-down face mask and the hat and the boots and every gloves. And you got this huge human scent wick in the tree with you, and then if you get winded, what do? What do you blame it on?
Right.
The suit didn't work.
Right.
And so it's not the fault of the consumer. They don't know any different. You know, they are replicating what the TV guys do because they think the TV guys know what the heck they're talking about. I've never, ever seen a TV guy that had a scent control regimen that I thought was worth anything.
Yeah.
None.
Yeah, so a lot of times the guys are buying the stuff, putting the suit on, and then they're throwing a salami sandwich and a can of pop into their backpack and walking out into the woods. And
Yeah, or spritzing, you know, I love these TV guys. They spritz a little spray on them and they're good. I mean, you got to be kidding me. That's like unbelievable.
yeah, we've felt we've been impressioned by them, you know, when we were younger.
Of course
and
you were.
you're looking
Yeah.
for guidance as a deer hunter, and man, a lot of that shit wasted a lot of years and
Yeah.
time and spending money on garbage products and this and that. It was really nice when the age of the internet came and people that were really doing the stuff and had insightful details on how to do it at different levels came about, and then we actually started getting educated, because any of that shit was, I don't know that any of it's ever helped me. You know, it's more hurtful because you're under the impression that this is the right thing to do. But
Well, I think more hunters should actually research technologies, not go by what some hunting website says. You know, because odor is something we can't see and we can't smell the amounts that would spook a deer.
Right.
So they can throw as much BS rhetoric out there, these hunting companies, and there's nobody policing their legitimacy. There's nobody giving them a ticket if it's wrong. Right. So you gotta research the actual technology. See how many other industries or worldwide governmental bodies use it. Because if it's viable, trust me, the hunting company didn't invent it. It's used someplace else. So if it's viable, it's going to tell you what other industries it's used in and to what capacity. So, you know, when ScentLock got sued about 10 years ago, they were in court for 5 years.
Yeah, I remember.
And it cost them almost $5 million in litigation fees. And finally, they lost the first case, which was in Minnesota, so they appealed it, and it ended up in a United States District Court. And what the United States District Court did is they had ScentLock send some of their garments to Rutgers University, because Rutgers University actually has a science lab and scientists, and that's all they do is work on activated carbon. That's what they do. And they tested it. And in the actual dismissal ruling of the United States District Court, I don't know exactly. Will almost be a direct quote. Using likely 10,000 times more odor molecules than the human body could produce in a 24-hour time frame, ScentLock garments absorbed or blocked 96 to 99% of all the odors.
That's crazy.
And that's using 10,000 times more odor molecules than a body could produce in 24 hours, and it still absorbed that much.
I find it odd. It's so functional and it all makes sense. Yet, you know, when I'm at hunting camp, so I very rarely see a lot of people using it. Do you think it's because of the extra effort, the little bit extra effort that it takes to keep? There's a process, right? I mean, you talk about regenerating the carbon, and I wanted to ask you too, how does it do in like wet weather? Is there a downfall to using it at all that you found?
No, wet. No, it doesn't matter if it's wet or dry. It still absorbs.
So it's just a layer that's essentially inside the garment.
And it's I mean, and it's very. If you actually see the amount of carbon that's in there, it's just paper thin. The actual carbon liner.
Yeah.
And that's one reason you're not supposed, in my opinion, you should never wash the suit unless it's physically dirty. And then I wouldn't use soap. I'd just wash it in water. Because basically this carbon is sandwiched between 2 layers of fabric, and it's kind of almost like putting hot glue in the middle and putting heat on it, so it kind of holds the two together and sandwiches the carbon. Well, the more you wash it, the more you're going to break down that glue, and the more you break down that glue, the more you're going to lose carbon, or it's going to all move to a different spot. So you're going to have gaps in the areas where there's no carbon, and then you're going to permeate human odor through there.
So what's the care process for the garments to make sure that they're functioning?
Just throw it in the dryer for about 40 minutes on the highest heat setting the dryer has, which is typically your timer setting, which gets to about 145
and
to 160
degrees. And does that heat
degrees.
the carbon to let it expand and release
that's exactly what it does. The heat energizes the molecules in both the carbon and the molecules that are actually bonded to the carbon. And anytime you heat something and it energizes it, the molecules move more rapidly, so it actually expands. It's the same exact thing in the concrete highways. There's expansion joints in the concrete highways because when it gets 80, 90 degrees and it's sunny out, the concrete molecules expand and or vibrate more rapidly.
Right.
So the concrete expands and there's expansion joints. Same thing in the Mackinac Bridge. Mackinac Bridge has probably several 12-foot expansion joints where the steel from the bridge on just mild heat days expands, and if they didn't have those expansion joints, the steel would buckle.
Right.
Same thing in the concrete highways. They would buckle because there's no expansion joints.
So it heats it up, and then probably a combination of the movement of the dryer and the air helps remove.
A lot of it goes out the dryer.
Any of the odor that's been contained in there, and now essentially you have a garment that's
it's deactivated enough for hunting purposes.
Right.
It's not turned back into its pristine state of activated carbon, because the only way you could do that is 1,450 degrees under pressure. So you're never getting back to that pristine state as when it was new. But you are regenerating it enough for hunting purposes. And there does become a saturation point, because this thing is so porous, but there does become a saturation point where there's enough molecules that have stayed bonded, because every time you regenerate it, you're not getting everything out. So there does come a saturation point where the suit does start to lose its effectiveness. There's no way of testing it, but it's usually about, with proper care, it's about 8 years for an average hunter, which is
you're
like
lucky
weekends for 3 months.
You're lucky if you get, 5-10 years out of hunting garments. So that's kind of on par with basically how people would generally purchase anyways, I would think.
Yeah, and patterns change, and everybody's got to have the new pattern.
Yeah.
Quote unquote, the new pot pattern.
Right.
Now the old pattern didn't work anymore.
Right. Yeah, I shot a lot of deer in tree bark.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm not a big fan of any of these new patterns. Predator is a great pattern, and I like a more open pattern. I don't like these cosmetically attractive, close to your hand patterns.
We've found real good luck going away from the printed stuff that's leaves and trees and going to more of just a digital camo on a macro and a micro scale that breaks your image up. And I've had does when I'm hunting on the ground of a longbow that I'll hunt on the ground with, and I've had deer, all around me feeding, just standing there, but I'm completely covered from head to toe, and they seemingly look through me. It's quite amazing.
When you can have a deer look up at you and then look at you for 5 seconds and then put their head back down and continue on, your pattern's working.
Because if you're ever walking through the woods in the end of November when all the foliage is down and someone is in, let's just say real tree or mossy oak, that from a distance you just look like this big blob.
Yep.
Yeah, it doesn't do the job of
look like a black bear in the tree.
Right. It's very appealing to look at. It looks really nice.
And that's what they make it for. They make it to be cosmetically appealing at the hand distance.
Right.
And because all the hunters on TV, they get sponsored, they get paid to use that stuff. So they use it, and that's what the typical consumer watches, and they think, well, that's the best stuff because my so-called expert guy that I like is wearing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty. Go ahead.
Do you use merino wool at all for your base
A lot.
layers?
I use merino wool a ton. Icebreaker merino wool.
All right.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of ScentLock's base layer garments. They have activated carbon in them, so they're very effective. But as long as I have on my exterior ScentLock suit, I'm fine. I'm not worried about anything else. And merino wool has a lot of absorptivity as well.
Yeah, it's like naturally antimicrobial.
Yes, you could probably, if you took a brand new merino wool top and you wore it for 4 days and stunk and sweat, you wouldn't be able to smell yourself. It's a very, very good antimicrobial, natural. And it also has a lot of absorptive capacity because the hairs are hollow.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've just started getting into it. So I've bought a base layer now, and you were even saying that you don't even wear your base layer when you go walking out into the timber. And I wanted to mention to you that there's a company called Kuiu that makes stuff online. You probably know about them.
No, I don't. Never heard
But
of
they their base layer pants for their merino wool have full length zippers on the legs, so you can zip it right when you get out to your stand. You can actually drop your scent lock, and then put this pant on, and it zips right up from your boots, right up the side of your legs. So then you can just pull your pants right out. You don't have to mess with your boots or anything. So
is it kind of, well, it'd have to be pricey with full length zippers.
I think their pants are like
120.
No, they're like 70 or 80 bucks.
That's actually pretty cheap.
Yeah, Kuiu's a direct consumer. You just go to their website and you order everything directly from them. Ships right to your house.
Oh,
they don't have a retail space.
Okay, so they cut out that 40% profit margin of a retail store,
which a lot of companies have started to utilize that model. And there's a couple things nice about that is that, they have better control over a lot of their products coming in and out, their consumer input and things, and they're able to make products more specifically that people are asking for.
Yeah,
we've had real good luck with direct-to-consumer stuff lately.
The owner of Kuiu was, I don't know if he was part owner or business partners with the guy that owns Sitka. When Sitka, they kind of wanted to go different directions with the company. So I think when Sitka started appearing in like Cabela's and stuff like that, that's when this guy branched off, and now he's stuck with the direct consumer model.
Gotcha.
So I don't know the exact history of the two different companies, but that's kind of what I've gathered from it.
Remember me mentioning your sunglasses outside? Fisherman Eyewear, which is a company I represent, they were the sales manager was Kevin. I can't think of his last name, but he was a minor owner in Sitka, and he works for Sitka now. He left Fisherman Eyewear quite a few years ago, and Sitka's really nice stuff, but there's no scent control stuff with it.
Right.
Yeah.
But anything merino wool is different than regular wool. Merino wool comes off specific merino sheep, and those sheep are always in 5,000 and higher elevations.
Right.
So that's why merino wool doesn't itch. There's no flies at those elevations. Regular wool itches because flies get on the fibers of sheep around their butt and any place where there's mud or dirt, and they nip at the fibers of the wool, and they actually put nicks in the wool, and then when they shear the wool, it all gets blended together, and those little nicks is what prick you on regular wool.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, merino wool there's no flies in the elevations they live in, so they don't have that.
Yeah, we've had it's really changed the way that we hunt just by being comfortable. Really, it's so nice. Him and I both just a merino base layer and some good heavy merino socks.
Yep.
And oh man, it's unbelievable how before I feel like I'd have to have like 2 big tubs of hunting clothes.
Yeah.
Where now I have more of a layering system, and that base layers, from 70 degrees to 20 degrees below zero. It's this, I'm wearing the same base layer. That's pretty amazing.
I'm the same way. Merino wool is my go-to,
Right. Yeah.
without a doubt. And merino wool is also kind of unique because it's not only an insulator, it's a coolant. It works both directions.
Yeah.
Right.
Because the sheep, where they're raised at those elevations, it can be 10 degrees below zero in the winter, and it can be 90 degrees in the summer.
Right.
So their wool fibers work in both directions as far as an insulator and a coolant.
Right. Yeah, it's been popular with the Western hunting scene for quite a while, but it seems like in the last couple of years, it's really moved into the whitetail.
Yeah. It's also been real popular in the outdoor market. Runners and stuff like that. It's hugely popular in Europe.
Right.
Huge in Europe.
Yeah, I got to imagine a lot of people who ski Europe, they have the big mountain ranges and whatnot. It's probably big in that just because of its ability, once you sweat, to still keep you warm too.
Yeah.
It retains so much body heat. So.
And exercise and outdoor activities are way more prevalent in Europe. You don't see people out of shape like you do in this country. Everybody's doing something. Right. And merino wool's a big fabric over there.
That's a good thing you mentioned that. That's something that I wanted to bring up. You're in your 60s now?
66.
And you're in great shape. And
I work out every day.
Yeah, but there's a kind of a movement right now. I don't know if you've paid attention to all the the fitness regiment in the hunting community.
No,
not really.
No, I don't know anything about it.
Okay, well here I'll lay the groundwork down for you, because you'd find some of it. I know you'd get a good kick out of some of it, because there's like guys that are very popular in the hunting industry right now because they have giant biceps and they're in the gym doing deadlifts, and it's the train to hunt and this and that. And I always looked at it a little differently. I wanted to work out and be in good shape so that one, recovering a big deer out of the woods is a pretty heavy duty task, and I wanted to be prepared for that. And two, when I'm your age, I want to be able to climb 25 foot in a tree. Yeah. And I feel like there's a lot of misinformation out there about these guys doing physical activity. A lot of them, real quickly what it turns into is, I guess the best way to say it, a big dick show. These guys want to, say.
I like that.
It's what it kind of turns into is these guys are putting bad information out there. There's guys saying, it doesn't matter if you're sore, get back at it, lift more weights and run farther.
That is so far from the truth, because bulk is not good for hunting. When you get bulky, you lose your flexibility.
Right.
The ideal scenario for hunting and climbing trees is to stay toned. Do a lot of reps with light weights. Just so that you stay toned. That's what my goal is. Because people that are bulky, like an Arnold Schwarzenegger was, they have zero flexibility, and they struggle to move smoothly.
Right.
And so that is totally not good for hunting.
Yeah, and if you're doing that in your 20s, I get it. You feel good. You're all jacked up, but there's repercussions for a lot of that later in life, where lifting all that heavy weight tears your joints up and your flexibility.
Yeah, it's hard on your muscles.
So I've always tried to take an approach of don't overdo it, stay in shape, because this is the hunting thing is it's not a sprint. It's a marathon. If you want to be doing it into your 60s,
Yeah.
and I just found there's been a lot of misinformation. So I was just kind of interested because I knew I'd heard you talk about that you work out every day. Just what cardio, weights.
I do pull downs. I switch every day. I do 180 sit-ups and I do mine in the evening while I'm watching TV. I do 180 sit-ups every night, which is 3 sets of 60 each. And then one night I'll do butterflies, 3 sets of butterflies and 3 sets of bench. And then the next night I'll still do the sit-ups, and then I'll do 3 sets of curls with that curl bar and 3 sets of pull downs. So one night I do curls and pull downs, the other night I do butterflies and bench. And I don't do a lot of weight. I just do a lot of reps with medium weights.
Yeah. Do you do any running or biking or anything?
I'm in the woods enough and outside to
doing enough
activity.
You're active enough where
yeah,
you don't have to dedicate.
I mean, I have an elliptical there if I need to. There are years I have done that when I felt I needed to, but typically I don't. No.
Right. And you feel that it's definitely critical, especially as you get later in age, to maintain your physical ability if you want to be able to deer hunt, right?
Absolutely, for climbing trees especially.
Right.
Climbing trees, and I mean, let's face it, when you work out, you just feel better. When you're in shape, you are in a lot better mental attitude than if you're out of shape.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any question about that.
That's the biggest thing that I've taken away from it is definitely your brain functions better. And do you eat any kind of specific diet or just typically try to?
I eat a lot of trash this time of year. During season, I quit drinking coffee. I don't eat any onions or garlic or spicy foods. I kind of watch what I eat.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not exuding any more body odor through my skin than I need to. Because right now, if I eat a hamburger with onions and my wife came home, she'd know immediately. She could smell it.
Right.
Because it
get
emits
that.
through my body.
Right.
So I try to keep it as, and also coffee, like drinking coffee. I love coffee. But when I drink it during season, especially in the mornings, it makes me anxious. And then when I'm walking in 2 hours before dark, if I lose my route or something, I get anxious and I start perspiring. It seems like I'm always in a hurry.
Yeah.
And coffee makes me much more so, and also makes me have to go to the bathroom.
Right.
So I don't drink coffee in the mornings during season.
That's a pretty huge undertaking when you're getting up at 1:30 in the morning.
You get there, right?
2.5 hours.
You know what? You just mentally do it.
Yeah.
It's not. It doesn't even enter my mind because I know that's what I have to do, so I do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you have to be mentally tough, basically, or mentally strong. Probably one of the mentally strong, but my most memorable hunt is I was in Missouri and I was bow hunting during gun season. The only time I was ever in Missouri hunting. I got permission from this guy on the phone, 40 acres, bedding area, and it was during gun season, and he said, you know what, because you're coming out here bow hunting, never talked to this guy before in my life, got him out of the plat book, because you're coming out here bow hunting, I'll let you hunt this 40 acres, and no, I won't let anybody else hunt it, because he owned a lot of property, but it was not contingent. There was 150 here, 80 over here, blah, blah, blah. So I went out there and I bolted this on the first day. I was blowing it off because I have to, prep some trees and scout the property. And I bumped this huge 10-pointer out of this bedding area with a doe. And on one side of the bedding area was a standing cornfield. On the other side was a pit cornfield. And the doe ran out through the pit cornfield, and obviously he was behind her. And I mean, it looked like a 180-incher. It was just really wide. I thought it was 26-inch inside spread. So it rained the next 4 days, and I hunted daylight till dark for those first 3 days that it rained. And when I say rain, it was a drizzle rain. It wasn't a hard pouring rain. It was just a light drizzle for 3 days. Daylight till dark. Every night I got back to the hotel, I had to wash, because I was wearing Rivers West as my exterior. I had sunlock underneath it, but Rivers West waterproof stuff was my exterior. So I had to wash my suits every night and dry them. So I wasn't getting to bed till like 11. And I was getting up at like 3 o'clock. So I'm getting 4 hours sleep. And sleep deprivation was definitely kicking in. And I'd passed up a couple Pope and Young bucks, and I'd seen the big buck one time while I was hunting. And then the fourth morning, the alarm went off. And I came so close to just shutting the alarm off and going back to sleep. And I was like, you know what? I'm out here. If it kills you, that's cool. But you're after that deer. You know he's there. You know, he was the incentive to go, basically,
Right,
seeing
yeah.
a buck like that. And I shot him that morning,
Oh, nice.
and it was 160-inch 10-point, 23.5-inch inside spread.
I know sleep deprivation all too well. I'm an electrician and I work a lot of like off shifts. We do like high voltage commercial and heavy industrial and stuff. So it's a lot of nights, weekends, and then having the 2 little kids. You know, there's been days where I've worked 18 hours, gone home, slept for 3, got woke up by a baby, slept for a half hour, and then went back to work for 16 hours, you know. So I know that feeling all too well. Just your eyes hurting from being open so much. And
you start hallucinating.
Yeah.
I mean, I was to the point where I was just not even thinking right. And with little kids, man, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
For sure.
Is there anything else that you feel is a pretty critical part of how you operate that you want to touch on?
I would say what most hunters, I think, do wrong is obviously scent control is number one. I think scent control is the next most important aspect to having your bow with you. But a lot of hunters like to hunt a lot. You know, they feel like they need to be in the woods all the time. So hunting close to or at your rut phase locations early in the season or during the October lull is a huge mistake. So, you know, hunting smart, I hunt way less hours now than I did 20 years ago or 30 years ago, but I hunt a lot smarter. So my rut phase locations, you know, I may hunt an apple tree that's got some scrapes under it first day or 2 or 3 of season, but I'll leave it alone for the rut phases. It's going to get totally left alone after that. I won't even go anywhere near it until at least Halloween. And so making sure that you leave your best rut phase locations totally alone during that October lull period is really, really important. Because even though you go in and people will hunt their best locations and they're not seeing the mature bucks, because here they're typically nocturnal, so you're not going to see them anyway, they're altering doe traffic. And all doe traffic, all buck traffic revolves around doe traffic. So if you're hunting a destination feeding location or a primary scrape area or something like that, and you're altering the doe traffic and not thinking that matters at all, you're mistaken. You know, a lot of times you'll hunt a spot like that and, you know, you get 6 deer come in this first evening, and then the next evening 4 come in, and then the next evening 1 comes in, and then none. So by altering that doe traffic unwittingly, you're altering the buck traffic to that location once the rut phases roll around, because now they're following doe traffic, and the doe traffic's not coming there till after dark.
Right.
So overhunting locations, especially your rut phase locations, or hunting them at all when you shouldn't be there is a big mistake.
Is it potential, too, that a lot of guys are infiltrating the woods that time of year and deer are relocating, and if you have a spot that you're staying out of, you're potentially setting the stage for deer to find a comfortable area that when you do know that it is optimal time and you do go there, deer have relocated into that area.
I'm actually glad you said that, because that brought me on another point. When I'm scouting public lands in southern Michigan, I have one rule that I'd never waver on. If I can walk to it in a standing position, upright position, it never gets set up. I don't care if it's a huge scrape area, there's apple trees all over the place. If it's easily accessible by other hunters, I don't set it up, because if any of that sign that's there is made by a mature buck, I can almost 100% guarantee it's all after dark.
Right.
So on public lands in Michigan, the only way I'm going to set something up is if I can get back to areas where other hunters are not willing to go, with either access by waders, hip boots, canoe, boat, or crawling on my hands and knees. I like to pretend everybody in this area is trying to kill me. So where are the only places in this area that I might consider going where I would get up and move during daylight hours?
Right.
Because that's what the mature bucks do.
Right.
They get pushed back to areas where they may feel comfortable moving during daylight hours, and if there's no places like that, they just don't move during daylight hours unless they're on a hot doe.
Yeah. I want to ask you this, because you spent a lot of time in buck bedding areas, deer bedding areas. Have you noticed deer? You know, I was always under the impression that when the rut rolled around, that bucks would have nothing to do with one another. They wouldn't be anywhere near each other. When buck bedding is good and right, is there typically more than one buck in there? And how have you watched them kind of like associate with each other? Because the couple times that I've found myself in a what I now know as, well, this is definitely a buck bed. There's a lot of times I've had 2 or even 3 deer in there, but in my experience, that's usually maybe 1 3-year-old and then a couple younger deer.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Typically, it depends on, first off, it depends on the area. I mean, if there's not a whole lot of other bedding areas for the deer to bed in, and this is the only area that's dense enough, you're going to have multiple deer bedding in it. But typically, if you have a mature buck bedding in a spot, he's not going to allow the next dominant buck or one of the other dominant bucks in the area bed anywhere near him. He may allow a subordinate buck, a 1.5-year-old bed someplace within the vicinity, because he doesn't view that as a threat, a threat to his dominance, or if he's with a hot doe. So yeah, absolutely, that's the case.
I just thought that was one thing to touch on, because I've noticed now that to be a trend that I need to be paying attention, because a lot of times I'll be watching a buck and you might be looking for him to look away to do something, and I've found that, oh no, there's a set of eyes right there that have been looking in my direction. And typically I've come to find out that if I'm in an area where there's a deer bedded, usually more than one.
Yep.
But I wondered, obviously when it comes to a mature deer, they won't tolerate another, what they deem to be
Competition.
A competitive, but they'll let a subordinate or a satellite younger buck be there.
Yeah, be within the area. Typically during the rut phases, a mature buck is not even going to allow a subordinate buck to be bedded very close to him. But there could be does bedded 50 or 100 yards away. But typically does don't like bedding where they're near a mature buck either, because they don't like getting pestered by them.
Right.
So they usually try to avoid them to the best of their ability.
Do you ever mess around with like any of that estrus scents?
No.
Or
I sell it, but I don't mess with it. I get it for free if I wanted to use it. The only thing I ever used on the scent side is tarsals that I've taken off deer myself, so they're real. I don't use any commercial scents at all. I got to keep in mind, I'm always hunting destination spots. I want my destination spots to work on the merits that I picked it for. So I'm not trying to use something to draw deer, and they're supposed to be coming there anyway. That's why I'm there.
Yeah, you want to minimize your altering of it as much as possible.
And a lot of times in the past, I mean, I've tried all that stuff. There's been years, back in the 70s and 80s that I did all that stuff. I experienced everything. And I would use like doe and estrus scents during the rut phases, and I'd have mature does come through because I'm still at a destination spot, and they would smell it and they would want nothing to do with it. They don't want anything to do with the rut period if they're not actually physically in heat. So they'll spook from it. And I've had them snort and leave because they just didn't want to be around anything that had to do with breeding, because they weren't in heat at the time and they didn't want to be chased and bugged.
Makes sense.
Is a lot of the downfall.
So I've had it work against me way more than for me. Yeah. I've had, now on the opposite side of that, I've had 5 points and 6 points and small 8 points follow that stuff back years ago, right up, if I had it on my shoe at the base of my tree. So, but that's not what I'm trying to kill. I've never had it work that well. I've never had it outweigh the negatives for killing mature bucks. I've never had it outweigh the negatives of how it messes up my spots more than helps them.
Yeah, I feel the same way. One of the big things that I started to realize is there's no way to get that stuff out without you potentially contaminating the area, and I think it's just more beneficial to
clean.
Yeah, leave it alone and not be there. If you could drop it with a drone, maybe.
Well, and you have to also consider most of these estrus scents are done by injecting something into does to get them to come into heat in July and August, because this stuff's all bottled in the summer, and it doesn't hit the shelves till September. Yeah. So, there's a good chance that there's some bacteria in it as well. So that's not going to smell like pristine deer urine. I mean, I've smelled urine in scrapes, fresh urine. It doesn't smell anything like human urine whatsoever, and typically it doesn't smell exactly the same as commercial scents that have bacteria in it.
Throwing off the hormones or something.
Yeah.
I would imagine.
Clean
Bring
is
them.
clean is always best, because when you're hunting amongst a boatload of other competitive hunters, you want to do as much as you can different than them. Otherwise, there's no reason for you to expect different success. And almost all hunters are using scents and rattling and grunting and, you know, all that stuff. So I try to be totally the opposite.
Yeah. Least amount of showing your presence
Yes.
possible, which leads me to the next thing that I want to ask you about is, I guess, how are you getting in and out of these spots? And then what is your take on how deer, I mean, I know we've talked a little bit about them coming in early, but is there anything in particular, the way that you see them travel in and out of these things, that you take into account when you move in and out of these locations, so that you're not potentially crossing paths with them? Or is that something that you just disregard due to your scent regiment?
My scent regiment totally negates me worrying about anything crossing my path. That's never, ever a concern. And because I'm in my trees so far before daylight, you know, I'm not worried that much about spooking. Obviously, you know, I've got a lot of my areas, I have a different entry route than an exit route. You know, I've got the one spot downstate where I'm hunting actually in the swamp, and I come through the swamp on my entries in the morning, because I know nothing's in the swamp. They've got no reason to be in the swamp in the morning. They're in the crop fields quarter mile, half mile away. So then when I exit, now the deer are actually in the swamp bedded. I'll take the shortest route outside of to get out to the timber edge of the swamp, and then I'll exit through the open timber.
Gotcha.
And then through the crop field.
So is it common? Is it more common for you to have a different way that you're coming in and going out, or is it just based on situation? Sometimes there's spots where you come in and out the same route.
I'd say 50% of the time I have a different entry than exit.
Okay.
They're totally different routes.
Right.
You know, last year that buck I shot in Ohio was prime example. The two guys that had the property, they'd been bow hunting that buck all year, even during gun season, and they missed it twice during gun season. It was a big 10-point. And the one thing the one guy was doing wrong, because he was actually hunting where I ended up killing this deer, is there was this row of pines, and it was like 5 rows deep, and it was on the edge of this big weed field. And then right as soon as you got past these pines, it dropped down into briars and tags and stuff, so it was deer were bedding down there. Well, these were white pines, so they were open underneath. You know, all the bottom branches were dead. So when he was coming in, he was walking along the edge of the pines for a couple hundred yards to get into the pine tree he had down the field edge. So he was spooking deer just over that hill down in the briars. And when he was spooking them, they were all obviously going through the briars and exiting out that way and spooking every other deer. Whether they were actually physically spooking them where they got up and left, I don't know that, but they were spooking them to the point where if they ran by a mature buck, he's not going to come up and come out in that weed field until after dark. So what I did differently is when I did my entry, because I went down there and prepped a tree, a different tree than he did, I actually walked down the edge of the weed field and walked out into the middle of the weed field for my evening entry, and then I walked directly to the tree. So I'm not walking down the edge and spooking anything over that edge. And then I hunted in the evening. I couldn't hunt mornings here whatsoever because I didn't have an entry that would not spook deer, so it was strictly evening hunts only. So I hunted that tree, and then when it got dark, because the first evening I saw a 2.5-year-old 6-point I didn't shoot, but when it got dark, my exit route was down over the hill through the bedding area where the deer were bedded. So I'm not, you know, they've already got up and came out through the weed field. You know, a half hour after dark is when I got out of the tree. So now I'm exiting through where they were bedded. And then the next evening I did the exact same thing, and I shot the 10-point that evening during a blizzard.
Interesting.
So I was just using a different entry route than the other guy that'd been hunting there all year.
Yeah, and
that's all that made the difference. That was
Right.
it.
Is there anything else that you want to?
Well, I mean,
Bring
I
up.
think you should maybe give a rundown of all your book titles and how people can find you and whatnot.
Okay. Website is www.deer, and that's DEER, hyphen, which is the little slash mark, john.net. And books are Bow Hunting Pressured Whitetails, Precision Bow Hunting, and Bow Hunting Whitetails the Eberhart Way. And then I have a 3 DVD series, which are basically the books in visual form. The DVD series, there's no kills on them. It's strictly instructional. They're all 2 hours long. DVD 1 is on postseason scouting and location preparation. And I would suggest if anybody's going to get one DVD, that would be it. I think that's the most important. DVD 2 is preseason scouting and location preparation, and DVD 3 is hunting techniques and tactics and scouting during hunting season if your plan's not working.
Cool.
And then my workshops is on the same website. The books and DVDs are on the website. My workshop, all the information on workshops or me scouting properties is on the same website.
All right.
Yeah, and just to give a brief explanation of what they're going on. They're starting now, right? Have you done one yet?
Did one last weekend.
Did one
my
last
first
weekend.
full one, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And basically, again, it's in field on a property I've hunted for 9 years. I've got 14 locations prepped. We go by every single location. I explain everything about them. And then the second day is at Jay's Sporting Goods in the Outback room in nice, comfortable office chairs, nicer than this one. So everybody's comfortable, and it's an all-day seminar, and it's a lot of Q&A. I love Q&A. There's not a whole lot of situations I haven't dealt with in the years I've been bow hunting. But it's going to touch on big time on scent control and just basically all the stuff that I do.
Awesome.
And you also get a 15% discount voucher that's good for a week at Jay's Sporting Goods.
And do you want to say that if anybody finds themselves in the fall hunting one of those locations that you were so kind to take them out to, that they'll receive the same treatment that you did as a young man when you
Exactly. Yeah. No, I'll just take my chainsaw and cut the tree down while they're in.
Just give them a little dose of Leroy while you're out
Yeah. Oh man, Leroy was a gem. He's dead now, but he was an interesting man. He was a big Willie Nelson fan. He was a country bumpkin. His wife is the one that worked. He didn't work. He's like a homeless person, but he bow hunted.
That doesn't sound half bad.
He killed deer though. He shot an old root bow, and they had a black widow bow, and he used to shoot a lot of competition, recurve competition in the 50s, and he was a good shot. He was a pretty dang good deer hunter, but he was a slime of a man.
I found that real interesting. I don't know if I read it or I heard it, but I know you shoot a real modern compound, but you don't use a release aid. You hunt with you use finger tabs.
Yeah, I still shoot fingers. Yep.
Just something that
just
you're comfortable doing?
Yeah, I've done it for a lot of years, and it's just one less thing mechanical that can go wrong.
I get it.
I know guys that have, set their triggers so light, and when they go to put their glove or whatever on the triggers let the arrow go before they were on the deer, and with your own fingers, it's pretty hard to make that mistake. And I get, I'm on Matthews Pro Staff, I'm on Carbon Express's Pro Staff, and Scentlock's Pro Staff, and so I get free bows all the time, and I'm still shooting. My primary bow is an old Conquest. It's the first bow Matthews sent me, and then I've got a Halon set up also with a release. But typically I'm not going to use that unless I'm going elk hunting, something where I need a longer distance. Most of my I set all my locations up for 12 to 18 yard shots.
Yeah.
So I'm really good at getting on top of the deer, and because I'm not a great archer. 25 yards is, when I gets over 25 yards, it starts getting outside of my comfortable wheelhouse.
Yeah. Well, that's respectful.
I shoot a prime, a G5 prime myself, but
Yep.
I just started learning how to tune bows.
Yep.
Just trying to learn it in my spare time that I have very little of. And my buddy had a Matthews Adrenaline, and I just did new strings and everything on that. And I was surprised how simple that bow was to tune and how great it shot afterwards and everything. They're nice bows.
Yeah, Adrenaline Switchback were probably two of their better bows. But this Halon, the new Halons, are doing really, really
Yeah, I haven't had
well.
the chance to shoot one of those yet, but I'm
But
sure
that
they're
G5
good.
Prime is a phenomenal bow.
Yeah, I really like it.
Yeah. The only reason I'm actually on Matthews Pro Staff is because they were, at the time, I'm shooting that 41-inch axle Conquest. That's a fingers bow. It's got a 65% as opposed to 80% cam. So they're the only ones, them and Hoyt were the only two companies that actually made a finger shooting bow.
Oh, all right.
So that's the reason I was on Matthews Pro Staff when I started with them.
That's interesting. Yeah, we both in the last couple of years picked up traditional bows and been doing a little bit of traditional bow hunting, and that'll tune your archery
boy.
skills in. That'll show some weaknesses in your game real quick.
Whenever I want to be humbled, I pick up my old Fred Bear and take it out back and fling some arrows out of it.
Do yourself a favor, don't go hunting with it.
Yeah, it's tough here in Michigan. I know I'll be excited. I am going to hunt with it this October. Some bigger tracts of land up in northern Michigan where I can get around with kind of moving in and going different places. And I'm not going to hunt my rut locations.
Oh, okay. I've probably on 6 to 10 times I've had guys convert or shoot longbows or recurves that shot compounds, and you cut your distance, you cut your effective shooting distance down dramatically.
Oh, yeah.
And probably 6 to 10 different times I've had guys say the biggest buck they've ever had an opportunity was at like 35 yards, and they wouldn't shoot that far.
Right.
If they'd had their compound, they'd have shot it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
always keep that in mind. You know, I shot a recurve for 12 or 13 years before I had a compound, so that's something I respect people that do that, but I would never ever go back to it because I wouldn't be able to shoot as good. You got to practice all the time with a recurve.
It's tough.
I think I could probably shoot, 6 to 8 inch groups at 60 yards with my prime all day.
Yeah.
And at 15 yards with my recurve, I'm happy if I just hit the block.
Touche. That's a good example.
There we go. Yeah, I've been telling people that I've really found it beneficial to me to practice with my traditional bow. Mm-hmm. It really strengthened my foundation for my overall archery skills. If I go a couple months and don't pick up my compound and I'm shooting that stick bow and I start to get real accurate with that, and once I take my compound, I simulate it to the transition from hunting with a compound to a gun.
Yeah.
It's like that much different to me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Or compound to a crossbow. Yeah.
Right.
Definitely.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. Yeah, you got to work hard at being able to be a good with a recurve. You got to shoot all the time.
Right.
And then go into a compound, yeah, I could see where that would be like picking up a gun.
Yeah.
Well, back in the day, Fred Bear fought compounds. Michigan Bowhunters Association fought compounds.
Right.
They didn't want to go to compounds because they knew how many hunters it was going to add to the hunting spectrum. Back before compounds, there was hardly any bow hunters.
Right.
When I used to ask people to hunt in the 60s and early 70s to bow hunt, man, they'd laugh and say, "You want to what? Hey, knock yourself out." That ain't the case anymore because instead of 50,000 bow hunters, there's 320,000 bow hunters.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's changed things. And crossbows have done the exact same thing now. Now we're getting more gun hunters convert over into archery season using crossbows.
Right.
Because they don't have to practice.
Yeah, they don't. Maybe just a little bit.
Not very.
Not really. once you sight in a crossbow, you can put it in the corner and, just like a gun, you pick it up the next year, the day before season, and shoot 2 bolts out of it. It's still dead on, and you go hunting. So it's very, very. You just, usually 50 yards is your maximum range. It should be anyway.
Right.
A lot of guys think they can shoot 100 yards with them, but
yeah. I think we can wrap up. I think we covered basically everything we wanted to get to. I want to thank you for doing this.
My pleasure.
And I want to thank you for all the content that you've taken the time to, put out and get out to the general hunting public. I think it has impact, and it's part of the reason why I wanted to start to do this is just if I can be a small percentage of getting good information out to people. So in the future, if you ever have anything that you want to reach out to people and make them aware of, we'll stay in contact. It'd be great to do this again at some point.
Anytime.
All right.
As long
Great.
as I have the time, that works. And I like giving out information. I like for people, bow hunters, to be as successful as they can because it kind of changes your life.
Yeah.
If you become somewhat successful at consistently killing decent bucks, it changes how your buddies or how the guys at the sports shop interact with you. It kind of makes you a little more comfortable in the fall dealing with your family during season. If you have to do something this day instead of going hunting, you're more apt to deal with it.
Right.
It just changes your whole perspective on.
Yeah.
sometimes on life. I've had emails from guys that were like, man, now I'm successful, and it's literally changed my life.
Yeah, no, I gather that. And I've kind of realized in a pretty short period of time, too, anything that comes out of your mouth is going to be honest. You're not much of a sugar coater.
I don't sugarcoat things. I pretty much tell it the way it is. If I have to offend somebody, so be it.
Right.
Perfect.
Because I do it all the time.
Yeah, I can see. Okay, well, thanks again.
Well, thank you.
Yep.